I never expected a Friday night to change my life completely. It began with a simple text from my so-called best friend. "You're coming, right? We're celebrating at Lux Rooftop. Don't flake." I should have known better. My name is Vanessa, 30, living in Chicago, juggling a hectic marketing job, a small apartment in the Loop, and a social life that's basically me surviving other people's chaos. But for some reason, I still trusted her. Maya. The rooftop was spectacular. The city lights spilling like liquid gold beneath us. The bar smelled like expensive cocktails and ambition. I spotted her immediately. The woman I thought I could trust with anything. Maya, 31, tall, flawless makeup, designer heels, clicking like a metronome of superiority. She smiled, that practiced, tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. Beside her were the usual enablers. Claire, petite, with that sugar and spice laugh that hid sharp teeth. And Jenna, who always wore a smirk like she owned the world. The first hour was harmless. Champagne flutes clinking, small talk, forced laughs. Then came the game. Maya's idea. She leaned in close, her perfume suffocating in the best way. "Vanessa, you know we love you, but it's time you prove yourself. Tonight isn't just fun, it's a test. Are you really the woman you say you are?" I froze. My pulse spiked. "Test?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Yes," she said, tilting her head, eyes glinting. "We've been nice, patient, supportive, but tonight you'll show us where your loyalty, your guts, and your worth really lie, or you'll fail spectacularly." The words hung in the air like smoke. A game? No, I realized it was a trap. By the third round of overpriced cocktails, they cornered me. Maya's plan was cruel, twisted. A $2,000 tab, entirely my responsibility, because apparently paying for their indulgences would somehow prove my loyalty, worth, and strength. I wanted to laugh, but my laugh caught in my throat. They expected me to bend, to humiliate myself while they sat back, judging every reaction. I looked at the menu. Truffle sliders, lobster bisque, Wagyu carpaccio, champagne towers. My credit card trembled in my hand. Maya smiled. Predatory. Claire whispered, "Don't embarrass yourself. We know how fragile you are." Jenna added, "We wouldn't even want you if you can't handle this." And that was it. That was the spark that ignited something inside me. A slow, deliberate, ice-cold clarity. I had been underestimated my whole life, dismissed, betrayed that people I trusted. But tonight, I would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. I smiled, but it wasn't the nervous smile I usually gave. This was the calm, measured smile of someone who had already made a decision. "Okay," I said softly, "I'll pay." They cheered, expecting submission, but I didn't reach for the card. I didn't speak again. I stood up, took my coat, and walked straight past them, out the rooftop door, down the elevator, and into the cool Chicago night. My only words to the stunned group behind me, "Enjoy your champagne. I've got my own plans." By the time they realized I was gone, they were panicked. Maya's text blew up my phone. "Vanessa, where are you? You can't just leave. The bill." I ignored it. I knew exactly what I was about to do. This wasn't just leaving. This was revenge. I walked 3 blocks until my lungs burned and the skyline blurred, then ducked into a tiny 24-hour diner and sat in a corner booth with a coffee that tasted like survival. My hands didn't shake. They moved with purpose. I didn't want to be the person who reacted. I wanted to be the person who planned. Maya and the others had expected a meltdown, tears, a humiliating apology. They would get none of that. I pulled my phone out and scrolled through their messages again. Everything. The laughter. The calculated comments. The little slights masked as jokes. People think words evaporate. They don't. Words are evidence. Step 1 was simple. Establish motive, and leverage. Maya worked freelance as an events consultant for high-end clients. She handled budgets that ran into six figures. Claire did social PR. Jenna sold access. All of them lived and breathed appearances, and appearances are fragile. If I could crack one seam, the whole dress would unravel. I ordered a cheap burner phone and an anonymous email address. It felt ridiculous and perfect. I started building threads, screenshots of Maya's texts, timestamps of the rooftop messages, a few well-chosen voice notes from the night that proved coordination, Maya whispering instructions, Claire egging her on. Nothing illegal. Nothing fabricated. This was all real. I organized it into a neat folder labeled Events Misconduct. People like neat folders. Next, I thought about who could do the unromantic work, shake loose the kind of attention that didn't rely on gossip, journalists, auditors, corporate compliance teams. The city's social scene was a small, incestuous ecosystem. One scandal pushed the right person to ask the right questions, and the rest followed like dominoes. A name came to mind, Luis Ortega, a freelance reporter I'd met once at a panel on influencer marketing. He'd been kind, stubborn, and had a nose for the small injustices that made good copy. He didn't do viral gossip. He did accountability. I messaged him from my burner account. Short, factual, no flourish. I have documentation showing event budgets were misreported and a pattern of humiliating behavior towards staff and vendors. Are you interested? I attached a sanitized excerpt, an annotated schedule, a time-stamped chat. I waited. While I waited, I made the other moves. I reached out, not overtly, but strategically, to a vendor Maya had used repeatedly, a boutique floral house called Marlowe & Co. They had been stiffed before, rumor said. I sent them a carefully worded note from a concerned procurement manager at one of Maya's clients, asking if they'd ever received partial payments or revised invoices for the Gatsby Gala last fall. The vendor replied with polite alarm. Yes, there were discrepancies. We chased billing for weeks. Bingo. Louise replied the next afternoon. This is interesting. I can take a look. Do you have anything that connects the billing issues to specific people? I sent him the folder. Clean, time-stamped files, no emotion, footage of text threads, PDFs of invoices with minor but telling inconsistencies, a list of vendors who had been paid late or not at all. I felt like a surgeon prepping a patient. Cold, precise, professional. Then I turned to the social side of things. People care more about their reputations than their bank balances, and Maya's whole self was built on cultivated perception. I set up two simple things: an innocuous Reddit thread under a throwaway account describing a recent trend of elite groups testing members with humiliation rituals, and a direct message to a middle-level influencer who had once bragged about being on Maya's guest list. The goal wasn't to start a stampede. The goal was to create plausibility. Rumors with a tale of corroboration are lethal. The beauty of all of this was how fast small things snowballed. The floral vendor forwarded my procurement email to a friend at a major catering house who forwarded it to their client liaison, who mentioned it sheepishly in a staff meeting. Luis called the next morning and said, I've got an editor interested, but I need one more thing. Something that shows this was intentional, not incompetence. I already knew where to find it. At the office a week earlier, I had seen a draft contract on Maya's laptop. Her negligence or arrogance had left it open. It referenced a deposit that never matched the bank ledger. A second glance at her LinkedIn recommendations revealed a pattern of glowing praise from clients with suspiciously similar phrasing. That pattern was the last stitch in the fabric. I compiled it all, added a timeline, and sent it to Luis with a short note. This shows pattern and intent. We set a meeting in a small coffee shop that smelled of espresso and possibility. Luis was careful, taking notes, asking the right legal-minded questions. He told me the story he'd run would be measured, backed by documents, and that he'd approach one of Maya's bigger clients for comment. I felt my stomach drop. This was the trigger. If a top client froze payments, Maya's cash flow would grind to a halt. Her carefully coiffed life would start to wobble. The next move was more theatrical.
and I loved it. I booked anonymously a consultation through an event planning forum with an influencer-heavy showcase, an imagined exclusive gala that would require a refundable deposit. Maya could not resist. She loved public shows of competence. I leaked the consultancy to Claire, telling her, again, anonymously, that a well-funded tech founder was looking for someone to execute a high ROI influencer gala. Claire forwarded the lead to Maya in a message that read, "This is perfect for your portfolio, babe. Act fast." The bait was set. I waited. Patience is a weapon. 2 days later, Luis's piece went live, a tightly written expose about inconsistencies in billing practices among several boutique event planners, illustrated with redacted invoices and vendor statements. It didn't name Maya outright, but it included enough detail for industry insiders to make the connection. The social feeds hummed. Vendors who had been too afraid to speak publicly before started tipping journalists. Within 24 hours, a major client emailed Maya's firm requesting an immediate audit of recent events. A freeze followed. Accounts held. Panic. At the same time, the fake gala invite pinged Maya's inbox. She replied within the hour, eager, professional, the exact tone that allowed confidence to be weaponized. She wired a deposit to secure the imaginary venue and began drafting glowing promises to the client. I sat across the room from a friend having lunch and refreshed the news. I felt unfairly calm, like a conductor hearing the orchestra rise on cue. They were on the ropes. The public question had been planted. Vendors whispered. Clients hesitated. Maya texted me, frantic and insistent, "Vanessa, call me. This is a mistake. We need to talk." I didn't answer. Not yet. There was one more move to make, one that would ensure the humiliation would be complete, and I'd have certainty that the consequences would be structural, not ephemeral. I opened my laptop and drafted a simple email to Maya's top client in the tone of a concerned partner. "We've noticed billing anomalies and want to request a formal audit of the last 3 events." I attached a redacted invoice and a vendor statement. I hit send with the same calm I'd had when I walked out of that rooftop. The silence afterwards was delicious and efficient. Behind the scenes, my trap had teeth. Public scrutiny would erode Maya's financial lifeline. Vendors would stop taking risk, clients would demand assurances, and when the world tightened, Maya would discover that people like her, people who trade in other people's dignity, have nowhere solid to stand on. I didn't gloat. I organized. I backed everything up in 2 places. Revenge is not drama. It's a sequence of effective actions. As I closed my laptop, Maya's name appeared on the screen in a frantic text. "You've gone too far. You'll ruin us both." I smiled and typed nothing, because ruin in this case was not reckless. It was the consequence. I watched the panic bloom like a disease, slow at first, then fast, devouring everything Maya had built. The audit request hit her inbox at 9:12 a.m. By noon, her top client had frozen payments and demanded an emergency meeting. Vendors who had quietly grumbled now sent formal letters asking for reconciliations. Her inbox flooded with terse, legal-sounding requests. The social feeds whispered and then elbowed one another into louder talk. The industry liked a scandal that cleaned house. She reacted the way the entitled do, not with remorse, but with counterattack. At 1:03 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Anonymity is a weapon, but I did. A man's voice. Well-modulated and iced with authority. "Ms. Rivera, I'm Detective Alvarez from the 5th Precinct. You've been named in a complaint regarding an attempted extortion scheme targeting Miss Cruz. We'd like to talk." My hands went cold. Someone had already begun to twist the narrative. I knew the terrain. The powerful don't admit fault. They manufacture equivalents. If Maya could flip this into me being the villain, an anonymous harasser, she could muddy the waters enough for counsel to argue the auditor was overreacting. I'd expected resistance. I hadn't expected a formal complaint so quick. That meant she had allies with resources. Derek, she had him. I breathed. No panic. Preparation. I called Lewis. He picked up on the first ring. "They're trying to flip it," I said, voice steady. "Detective Alvarez called me. Someone filed a complaint." He swore softly. I suspected they wouldn't go quietly. "Keep everything. I'll pile more on my end. I'll run another piece if they escalate." He was calm, which steadied me. Next, legal counsel. I couldn't afford a private shark, but I could get smart, pragmatic help. I called a public interest lawyer I'd met once volunteering for a community board, Monica Reyes. Late 30s, sharp hair, sharper brain. If they try to frame you, we counter with a timeline, she said immediately. We'll file a notice of intent to sue for defamation if they proceed without evidence, and we'll give that detective your full timeline and all the documentation. People don't like being lied to in official records. I wired a retainer I could hunch together from savings and the emergency fund I'd built. This was war by the book. Within hours, Monica had a 3-page letter composed and ready. She emailed Detective Alvarez with my organized dossier and asked for the complaint copy. If they filed something, we want to see the exact allegations, she wrote. She also filed for a preservation order, demanding that any related communications from Maya and Derek be saved. Digital trails are slippery. Preservation is how you nail them. Meanwhile, Maya launched her PR counter. Her publicist, one of those glossy diplomats who knows how to make a scandal look like a scandal's opposite, released a statement that read like a playbook. Allegations are baseless. Our client condemns harassment and will cooperate with authorities. Social channels lit with 2 kinds of people: those who instinctively sided with the powerful and those who sniffed blood. The toxicity was symmetrical. It's always easier to smear than to substantiate. Derek, for his part, was merciless. He called my manager at the startup, pretending to be a concerned corporate counsel. He hinted that my involvement in the unfolding narrative could become a reputational risk for the company. Subtle, insinuating, the kind of thing that keeps HR awake at night. My manager called me in. The tone was awkward, professional, and unnerving. We need reassurance, she said. We can't have our staff involved in public controversy. I handed her Monica's letter. She read it, then nodded slowly. We'll continue to support you. And I believed her. But the pressure was real. These were people who knew how to make reputations wobble with soft threats and canned language. The city moved in small theaters. I had the detective visit me for a recorded statement. Monica sat beside me, listening to the questions and adding nuance when the officer's pen worried at the margins. I gave dates, times, vendor names, sequences. I answered in the plain, unromantic truth. Monica then handed the officer copies of the redacted invoices, the vendor statements, Luis's preliminary notes. We're not seeking drama, she said. We're seeking clarity. The officer's posture softened. Paper matters. But Maya's camp escalated in the dark. At 10 p.m. that night, a parcel arrived at my apartment. An anonymous courier, no signature required, containing a USB drive and a printed exposé alleging that I'd orchestrated a series of anonymous tips to journalists in return for payment. The file was a collage of manipulated screenshots, cherry-picked DM exchanges, and a memoir-like piece of fiction about bribed reporters. Whoever had assembled it had some tech skill and access. The implication was clear. I was a paid smear artist. That would have been laughable if it weren't dangerous. In the wrong ear, in the wrong time, planted cleverly, that kind of thing can sway a desk editor. Monica handled it like the professional she was. Deep breath, note the source, do not amplify. She advised me to post a concise public statement. The accusations were false, evidence tampered, and all private correspondence preserved. Transparency disarms rumors like bleach. We published the statement on my social channels, our tone factual, not defensive. The next morning, a different tenor emerged. An independent forensic analyst Luis recommended, someone who'd once tracked corporate fraud for a mid-sized bank, sent a formal analysis of the USB content to Monica. Metadata showed the files had been assembled on a machine linked to an IP range associated with Derek's firm. He didn't make claims beyond the data, but the trail was there. Timestamps, creation logs, an unclean link. He sent it to the detective. A week later, Detective Alvarez called to say they'd opened a supplementary inquiry into the tampering of evidence. The posture shifted. The hunters had become the hunted. At the same time, vendors began to speak up publicly. Names, dates, unpaid invoices, their own small bank statement screenshots attached. The narrative tightened. Luis published a follow-up, an exposé about the tampered files and the pattern of retaliation against vendors who dared to speak. He quoted the forensic analyst. The city's feeds, which had been a rumbling problem for me, turned into an amphitheater of corroboration for the truth. Maya responded with a last desperate flourish, an attempt to blackmail a vendor into recanting, documented in frantic text the vendor posted to a torrent of small press blogs. That move led to a cascade I'd not expected. A vendor who once feared her finally stood in front of a microphone at a small press room and told the story. The press room was not a TED stage, but the ripples reached the client who had first frozen payments. They reinstated an internal audit committee and paused the investigation into my involvement. Their message: we will not be party to intimidation. I didn't know whether to breathe. Justice is not cinematic. It's granular and slow, and on good days, real. I did the practical things. I backed up every email, every vendor statement, scanned receipts, and cataloged everything in mirrored folders. Monica drew up a plan for a civil suit to reclaim damages and to ensure Maya and Derek would pay vendors what they owed. We would not only fight for my name, we would fight for the livelihoods of the people who'd been used as leverage. There were costs. I slept poorly. My friends tightened around me. Some messages came late and awkwardly apologetic, we didn't know, and I accepted some, deferred others. The rooftop group splintered, reputations frayed. Claire's marriage creaked under its own complicit weight. Jenna deleted several threads and blocked people. The social ledger balanced painfully. 2 months into the campaign, a quiet thing happened that felt enormous. Marlowe & Co., the floral vendor, published a ledger correction and an open letter about transparency in contracting. That was the sort of institutional acknowledgement that makes litigators smile. It also made funders nervous. Investors hate unquantified risk. And then, finally, the phone call I'd imagined 100 times. The startup, my workplace, sent an official email offering their support, a formal apology for the implication that I'd been a risk, and an invitation to lead the next product launch pro bono so I could set the tone. I sat at my kitchen table and let the words land. It wasn't the vindictive roar I had once imagined in smoking victory. It was a quieter, fuller thing, a restoration. But I wouldn't pretend the damage hadn't been done to Maya and Derek. They had unspooled themselves by trying to protect a performance. They'd weaponized the social script and found their scriptwriter writing back with facts. In the end, their desperation and entitlement were their undoing. That night, long after Monica tucked her notes away and Luis planned his follow-ups, I walked the Riverwalk alone and felt the city breathe around me. The lights, the hum, the endless small smiling dramas. Revenge had not been fireworks show. It had been legal letters, patient documentation, forensics, journalists who cared about truth, and vendors brave enough to speak. It had been more meticulous than any of my enemies imagined. I looked at my phone and typed one short message into an old group thread where the rooftop gang still lurked. I hope you're all doing well. I didn't hit send. Some things are best left to quiet memory. I folded my coat around me and headed home, careful, deliberate, and unglorying the way wins feel when they are earned and not merely shouted.
The following morning, I woke to a quiet apartment, the kind of silence that tastes like anticipation. I poured coffee and stared at the skyline. The city was alive, oblivious to the wars waged in conference rooms, DMs, and legal inboxes. But the phone buzzed almost immediately. Monica. "Leo," she said, calm and clipped. "We've received confirmation from the police detective. Derek's attempts to tamper with evidence are now an active case. The vendor recant threats have been documented. Your civil suit can begin next week. You'll have damages, not just vindication." I let out a long breath. 2 months of tension, 2 months of sleepless nights, careful documentation, patient waiting, all funneled into this moment. It wasn't joy yet. That would come later, after the court filings and after the money returned to the vendors. For now, it was just a pause, a small crack in the concrete of chaos. Later that day, I met with Luis at a small cafe downtown. He slid into the booth, a battered notebook in hand. "They're panicking," he said, eyes scanning the street. "Maya and Derek know we have everything. The press exposure, the forensic report, the vendor confirmations. It's all airtight." I sipped my coffee, feeling the bitter warmth. "They think they can spin their way out of consequences." "They underestimated patience," Luis said, "and documentation. People like them always do." It wasn't long before the first wave of repercussions hit. Vendors who had been intimidated into silence were now reimbursed. Payments that had been frozen were released. The city's small press circuit ran follow-up stories about corporate bullying, evidence tampering, and the power of precise documentation. For once, the public wasn't responding to a clickbait headline.
They were responding to facts. Maya's publicist tried damage control. She tweeted vague apologies about misunderstandings, but by now, the trail of emails, invoices, screenshots, and witness accounts left no room for narrative gymnastics. Derek's name was now formally associated with tampering attempts in the police report. Every move they tried to contain the story only spread it further. By midweek, my inbox was flooded with messages from journalists, vendors, and colleagues. "Thank you for standing firm. We finally got our payments. You gave us courage." That was the part I hadn't anticipated, the ripple effect of quiet justice. One person standing firm allowed others to reclaim their dignity. I had expected revenge to feel satisfying, but it didn't feel like a roar. It felt like the slow unfolding of balance, like a ledger correcting itself. Every invoice returned, every vendor statement validated, every small acknowledgement of truth. It added weight to the reality that the entitled could be held accountable, but only if patience and precision were employed. At the apartment that evening, I opened the folder where I had stored all correspondence, forensic reports, and receipts. I laid them out methodically, a visual map of meticulous planning, careful observation, and calculated response. It was almost beautiful. An army of papers, each a soldier in a battle for justice. Louise called again. "Next week, the civil filings go in. We're asking for damages to vendors, plus your legal fees, plus a formal public apology. Maya will try to settle quietly, but she knows we hold all the cards." I nodded, sipping my second cup of coffee. "Let them try," I said quietly. "No shortcuts this time. No hasty judgments. Every step documented." The city lights began to flicker as dusk fell. I stood at the window, watching the traffic pulse below, people moving, oblivious to the micro wars around them. I thought about Maya, about Derek, about the moments they thought they could intimidate me, twist truth, or silence evidence. They had made miscalculations at every turn. Arrogance always blinds the entitled. By the weekend, the first court notices arrived. Copies sent to Maya and Derek and to the vendors involved. The letters were formal, sharp, concise. They outlined claims, damages, and supporting evidence. Monica assured me that the filings left no ambiguity. "We have timelines, we have documentation, and we have witnesses." Maya's panic grew. Texts became desperate, then aggressive, then absurd. She offered settlements that would have cost her tens of thousands, knowing I would never agree. Derek tried intimidation via emails, hinting at potential industry backlash. Monica countered methodically, using every documented email, screenshot, and witness statement. Each day felt like walking a narrow bridge, balancing anticipation, strategy, and vigilance. But there was a rhythm to it. Every move from them could be countered, every bluff called, every threat neutralized with facts. The world may respond to narrative, but evidence is immutable. And then, on a Tuesday morning, the turning point arrived. A senior editor at a major city publication called. "We want to run the story of the entire chain. Corporate bullying, vendor intimidation, attempted evidence tampering, legal backlash ensues." Derek's name was highlighted. Maya's attempts at counter-narrative were included, but clearly discredited by the documentation. Social feeds erupted, but this time, the narrative wasn't controlled by entitlement. It was controlled by truth. The vendors reached out with gratitude, some even with small gifts of appreciation. One florist hand-delivered a bouquet with a card for standing firm when we could not. I felt a warmth that wasn't triumph. It was connection, a realization that integrity creates community. Maya and Derek, meanwhile, had begun the slow retreat. Settlements quietly processed, apologies drafted under Monica's watchful eye. Derek's firm faced internal reviews. Maya's publicist began softening her messaging. The entitled always recoil when the structure supporting them collapses. I finally allowed myself a moment of stillness, a rare pause in a city that never stops. My phone sat silent, my email contained, and for the first time in months, I felt a quiet victory. Not the loud revenge I had once imagined, but a deliberate, meticulous reclamation of truth and dignity. Tomorrow, I knew, court filings would continue, public narratives would shift further, and I would remain vigilant. But for tonight, the city lights, the quiet hum of traffic, and the knowledge that patience, evidence, and precision can defeat even the most entitled adversaries, that was enough.
Friday morning arrived with a crispness in the air that felt almost ceremonial. I had grown accustomed to the rhythm of this week: documents, filings, calls, and measured responses. But today felt different. Today, the end game was near. Monica had confirmed that the civil suit would be settled and the vendors would be fully reimbursed. The only variable left was the final public acknowledgement from Maya and Derek. The first call came just before noon. Monica's voice was sharp and pleased. They're ready to sign the settlements. No more stalling. They've agreed to pay damages, reimbursements, and your legal fees. Maya's final statement is drafted. She'll publicly acknowledge the wrongdoing. It's all there, in writing. I exhaled. Months of tension, sleepless nights, and careful calculations were about to culminate in closure. But I didn't celebrate just yet. There was one final step, one last face-to-face that I knew I had to endure. The meeting was set in a neutral conference room downtown, glass walls overlooking the city. Derek arrived first, his posture stiff, eyes avoiding mine. Maya followed, a mask of contrition that barely concealed panic. Monica and a legal representative flanked me on either side. "Leo," Maya began, voice wavering, I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "You realized perfectly," I said, voice calm. "You realized that your actions, threatening vendors, attempting to manipulate evidence, and putting everyone in jeopardy were unacceptable. I documented every step, every communication, every threat. And now it's all on record." She flinched slightly. Derek's jaw tightened. The room felt charged, but not with fear. It was a calculated confrontation of truth versus entitlement. Monica handed me the signed settlements and final statement. I scanned them, confirming every detail: reimbursement of vendors, coverage of legal fees, and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Every I dotted, every T crossed. Maya's eyes welled up. I was scared. I thought you'd never fight back. I panicked. You didn't panic. You made choices that endangered others and forced accountability. That's what this was about. Consequences, responsibility. Derek attempted to speak, but Monica's sharp glance silenced him. "Anything you say now is unnecessary. The record is complete." I handed back the papers. "This is your closure. Learn from it. Ensure it never happens again." The room was silent, but it carried weight. The weight of lessons learned too late, of arrogance humbled, and of deliberate, patient justice. Maya and Derek left, shoulders slumped, faces pale with the recognition of defeat. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, feeling the warmth against my skin. The city buzzed around me, oblivious, yet somehow aligned with the order I had reclaimed. This was my city too, one where integrity matters, patience is a weapon, and accountability is non-negotiable. The vendors reached out over the weekend. Messages poured in, flowers, emails, even small tokens of gratitude. The florist who had delivered the first bouquet returned with another, a note tucked inside. "For patience, for diligence, for standing when we could not. You changed lives this week." I smiled. Revenge had not been my motive. It had been justice. But justice, when executed with precision, patience, and unwavering adherence to truth, carries its own satisfaction. By Monday, Maya's public acknowledgement was live. Social media buzzed, not in gossip, but in respect for the process, the documentation, the transparency. Derek's professional reputation bore the subtle scars of overconfidence and unethical behavior. The vendors, once silenced by fear, now spoke freely, their operations restored and reputations intact. I returned to my apartment, finally allowing myself to relax. The city hummed below, a constant reminder that life moves forward. I opened my laptop, checking emails and scheduling, but the weight of anxiety that had clung to me for months had lifted. Lewis called later that evening. "So, it's done. You're officially untouchable in this scenario. No loose ends? No surprises?" I laughed softly. "Untouchable or just patient?" He said. "Both, but mostly patient." The sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets. I sat at my window, reflecting on the journey,
The threats, the manipulation, the fear, the patience, and ultimately the meticulous justice. Maya and Derek had underestimated the power of documentation, the importance of measured response, and the inevitability of consequences. And now they knew. For the first time in weeks, I poured a glass of whiskey and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through me, not as celebration, but as a quiet acknowledgement. The battle was over, the balance restored, and the city, at least in this small corner, was right again. Revenge wasn't a shout. It wasn't a spectacle. It was the quiet certainty that those who tried to manipulate, deceive, and intimidate would meet accountability, not through anger, but through unwavering adherence to truth. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying outcome of all.